The glass-walled conference room on the top floor, Whitmore Company, overlooked the city like a throne room surveying its kingdom. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, bouncing off the polished mahogany table, where 12 board members sat in dark suits, their laughter echoing off marble floors. At the far end of the room, on his knees with bucket and mop, was Thomas Gray. His overalls were worn, his knuckles rough from years of scrubbing floors. He moved quietly, almost invisible, at least to the men who hardly acknowledged him. Careful with that mop, one of them sneered, not even looking up from his papers. That floor costs more than your rent. The others chuckled. Another leaned back, sipping coffee from a gold-rimmed cup. Imagine spending your whole life wiping up after men like us. Pitiful, really. Thomas pressed the mop harder into the bucket. He had heard their laughter for years, laughed in the hallways, snickers when he entered a room, whispers about how a black man like him should know his place. But today was different. Today, the company was expecting a new chairperson to be revealed. The boardroom buzzed with anticipation as the men speculated who it might be. Another Whitmore cousin, no doubt, or one of the senator's golfing buddies. Whoever it is, I hope they actually know what they're doing. Thomas finished his work and quietly wheeled the bucket toward the door. A few of them exhaled with relief, as if the smell of bleach leaving meant the air was cleaner. Just as his hand touched the door handle, the assistant entered briskly, clutching a leather folder. "Gentlemen," she announced, her voice firm, "allow me to introduce the new chairperson of Whitmore Company." All eyes turned to the door. And then, to their horror, Thomas Gray turned around, peeled off his gloves, and walked calmly toward the head of the table. The room froze. Chairs creaked as men shifted, blinking in disbelief. The CEO half stood, his face pale. "Excuse me, there must be some mistake." The assistant shook her head. "No mistake. Mr. Thomas Gray, Harvard graduate, silent investor, and now majority shareholder. Effective immediately. He takes his seat as chairperson." Gasps. Stammering. A coffee cup slipped from a hand and shattered on the polished floor. Thomas sat down at the head of the table, folding his hands. His voice was calm, but it carried through the room with the weight of thunder. "You were so busy laughing at the janitor," he said, eyes sweeping across the table, "that you never thought to ask who I really was. Today, the one you dismissed is the one you now answer to." The room fell silent. Arrogance drained from their faces, replaced by the first flickers of shame and fear. And Thomas, the man they mocked just minutes earlier, leaned back in his chair, the seat of power, and whispered, "Now, let's begin." The room was silent, the kind of silence that weighed on the skin like humidity, thick and suffocating. Thomas Gray sat at the head of the table, calm and unshaken, while the men around him shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. A janitor at the head of the table. It was an image they couldn't digest. Finally, one of them, a younger executive with slick-back hair, forced a laugh. "This is absurd. A janitor with a Harvard degree? With shares? I don't buy it." Thomas didn't flinch. He slid a folder across the polished table. Inside were documents stamped and notarized, showing his stock holdings, board approval, and appointment. The man's smirk faltered as he scanned the papers, his face draining of color. "I didn't come here for your approval," Thomas said evenly. "I came for accountability." He opened a second folder. This one was heavier, filled with reports, numbers, names, evidence. This company has thrived off the backs of workers you don't see. Black workers, immigrant workers, women, people you pay less, promote less, and discard faster. While you sip coffee and laugh, they bleed loyalty into your profits. The board members stiffened. Some looked at the documents with unease, others with open irritation. Charles Whitmore, the oldest and most powerful of the group, leaned forward with a sly grin. "And what exactly do you plan to do, Mr. Gray? Tear the company apart in the name of dignity?" Thomas's gaze locked with his. "No, I plan to rebuild it in the name of justice." The meeting grew tense. Thomas laid out his vision. Fair hiring practices, wage transparency, mentorship programs, equity audits. His words struck like hammer blows against decades of arrogance. Some faces softened with reluctant respect. Others hardened with hostility. One board member scoffed, throwing down his pen. "You'll ruin us with this nonsense. Shareholders won't stand for it." Thomas leaned forward. "You mean the shareholders who've already seen profits from a system built on exploitation? Or the shareholders who never once asked why the janitor stayed late and overheard every conversation in this very room? Trust me, some truths are worth more than your stock price." The jab landed. The man fell silent. But not everyone was silenced. Whitmore's grin never wavered. He leaned back, folding his arms. "Bold words. But let's see how bold you are when the gloves come off." He snapped his fingers. An assistant appeared at the door, carrying a slim briefcase. Whitmore opened it and spread a stack of papers on the table. Employment records, financial transfers, even surveillance photos. "Since you're so fond of reports," he said coolly, "perhaps the board should know what our new chairperson has been hiding. Tell me, Mr. Gray, how does a janitor afford millions in shares? Where did your money come from? Or should I show them?" Murmurs erupted around the table. Eyes darted between Thomas and the damning documents. Thomas's jaw tightened, but his expression stayed steady. He had expected resistance, but not this early, not this bold. Whitmore's smile widened. "Gentlemen, I say we put to a vote. Do we follow this custodian's crusade, or do we expose him for the fraud he truly is?" The room buzzed with unease. The power Thomas had seized was slipping toward a dangerous edge. Then, without breaking his calm, Thomas leaned forward, his voice low but commanding. "You think you've found my weakness, Charles, but what you don't realize is this." He tapped the folder in front of him. "The real secret in this room isn't mine. It's yours." Gasps. Eyes widened. Even Whitmore's grin twitched for a split second. Thomas sat back in the chair, unbothered, as if he'd just moved a chess piece none of them had seen. The tension was unbearable. The men stared, waiting for him to reveal what he meant. But Thomas only folded his hands, his voice a quiet thunder. "Shall I open this folder? Or would you prefer confess first?" For a long moment, the only sound in the boardroom was the faint hum of the city outside the glass windows. Thomas Gray's hand rested calmly on the folder before him. The board member's eyes darted between his steady face and Whitmore's carefully maintained smirk. The air smelled of sweat, leather, and fear. Whitmore finally broke the silence. "Go on, then," he said, his voice smooth but laced with steel. "Open it. Let's see what you think you know." Thomas leaned back instead. "No," he said softly, his eyes piercing. "I'll let you sweat a little longer, because you and I both know the rot doesn't start with me. It starts with you." The words landed like stones dropped in still water. Murmurs rippled around the table. Thomas tapped the folder once, deliberately. "This contains a paper trail, shell companies, offshore accounts, bribery payments to politicians. I've been listening, Charles. While I mopped your floors, I heard every whispered deal, every late-night phone call you thought no one caught. And now," his voice sharpened, "I have the proof." Gasps. One board member reached for the folder, but pulled back, afraid. Another muttered, This can't be true." Whitmore's smirk faltered just slightly. He leaned forward, his knuckles pressing hard into the polished wood. "You're bluffing. A janitor couldn't possibly." Thomas cut him off. "A janitor had nothing else to do but watch you for 10 years. That was your mistake." The room turned. The balance of power had shifted. And for the first time, Whitmore looked cornered. But then Whitmore laughed. A hollow, bitter laugh that carried no joy. "You think this room decides who wins, Gray? No, the world outside these windows does. And the world listens to me." He snapped his fingers. The assistant reappeared with a tablet, screen glowing. Whitmore turned it toward the board. On it was a live news feed. The headline scrolled in bold letters. "Breaking. New Chairman Thomas Gray accused of corporate espionage." A reporter's voice filled the room. "Sources allege that Gray gained access to sensitive company information through unlawful surveillance during his time as janitor." The board gasped. All heads turned toward Thomas, eyes wide with uncertainty. Whitmore leaned back, his grin returning. "While you were busy playing detective, I was busy writing the story the public will believe. The janitor who spied. The janitor who cheated his way into power. The blow hit hard. Some board members shifted their allegiance instantly, whispering, shaking their heads. Thomas's heart thudded, but his face stayed composed. He knew Whitmore's reach was vast, but he hadn't expected the attack to drop in real time, right here in this room. Still, he raised his chin. Lies don't last, Charles. Truth has a way of surfacing. Whitmore leaned forward, his smile now venom. Then you better hope you can surface before I drown you. The tension reached its breaking point. Half the board looked ready to side with Whitmore. The other half sat frozen, unsure whom to trust. The balance teetered. Thomas stood slowly, the city skyline blazing behind him like a crown of fire. He placed both hands on the folder and looked every man in the eye. "You won't believe his story?" he said, his voice deep and steady. "Then I'll give you a choice. Either you let me reveal what's in this folder, or you follow Whitmore blindly and go down with him. Because when the truth breaks, and it will, you'll have to answer not to me but to the world." The room fell into a charred silence. The weight of his words pressed against their chests like a storm waiting to break. Finally, one board member whispered, "Show us." Another nodded. "Yes, open it." More voices followed. A tide was turning. Whitmore's smile faltered for real this time. His fingers tightened around the tablet. Thomas lowered his eyes to the folder, his thumb on the flap. The moment had come. He drew in a deep breath, and then the door slammed open. A man in a dark suit, badge gleaming at his chest, strode into the room. Behind him, 2 more agents. "Thomas Gray," the lead agent announced, voice echoing off the glass walls. "You're under investigation. You're coming with us." The board gasped. Chairs scraped. Whitmore's smirk returned, sharper than ever. Thomas looked at the folder, then back at the agents. His hands did not shake. "This," he said quietly, "is exactly what I expected." And as the agents reached for his arms, Thomas whispered, just loud enough for the board to hear, "Open that folder if I don't return." The room went cold as Thomas Gray was cuffed and led toward the door. The board members sat frozen, their eyes flicking between the folder on the table and Whitmore's smug smile. The lead agent's voice cut the silence. "This man is under suspicion of corporate espionage and fraud. He'll be taken in for questioning immediately." Whitmore folded his arms, basking in the moment. "Well," he said smoothly, "it seems our little drama is over. Justice has spoken." But then Thomas stopped in the doorway. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Justice hasn't even arrived yet. But when it does, Charles, it won't be at my expense." He turned his head slightly toward the board. "And remember what I said. Open the folder if I don't return." The agents pulled him out, the heavy door slamming shut behind them. For a moment, silence suffocated the room. Then the murmurs began. One board member leaned toward the folder. "Maybe we should see what's inside." Another hissed, "Are you mad? That could incriminate us all." A third, sweating, whispered, "What if it clears him?" Whitmore's voice cut through the panic. "Don't be fools. That man has been scheming from the start. A janitor with a Harvard degree? A silent investor? Lies stacked on lies. If you open that folder, you open Pandora's box." He stood, circling the table like a predator. "Stay with me, and I'll protect this company. Stay with him, and you'll all go down in flames." The fear in the room was palpable. Some nodded in agreement, desperate for safety. Others looked conflicted, their eyes darting back to the folder like moths to flame. Then, quietly, a hand reached across the table. It was Eleanor Price, the only woman on the board, a sharp-eyed strategist who had spoken little until now. She pulled the folder closer, ignoring Whitmore's glare. "Enough games," she said. "If we're making a decision about leadership, we need all the facts." Her fingers lifted the flap. "Stop," Whitmore barked, slamming his palm onto the folder. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Gasps. The board froze. Whitmore leaned in close, his face twisted with barely restrained fury. "You don't know what you're tampering with." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "That's exactly why it needs to be opened. The standoff was electric. Half the board watched Whitmore, half watched Eleanor, and then Eleanor yanked the folder free and spread its contents across the table. Pages spilled out. Bank records, shell corporations, secret payments to politicians, evidence of tax evasion, names, dates, signatures. The room erupted in chaos. One board member whispered, "My God, this would ruin us all." Another stammered, "If this leaks, Whitmore is finished." A third muttered, "He's been using the company as his personal laundry machine." All eyes turned to Whitmore. His mask of arrogance cracked. For the first time, true panic flickered across his face. "You fools," he hissed. "Do you realize what you're looking at? If that gets out, we all go down." But Eleanor's voice cut him. "No, Charles, you go down. This isn't about us. It's about you." The board murmured agreement, some emboldened by the evidence, others terrified but unwilling to defend Whitmore any longer. And then, suddenly, the door burst open again. The same federal agents stormed back inside. But this time, they weren't holding Thomas. They were holding another man, a younger executive, pale and trembling, his tie half pulled. The agents shoved him forward. "We've got him," the lead agent barked, caught trying to shred documents in the records room. The board gasped. The man stammered, I was following orders." His eyes darted to Whitmore. "You told me to." "Enough." Whitmore roared, but the damage was done. Every head turned toward him. The room shifted like a tide. Whitmore's power was crumbling before their eyes. Just then, a new sound cut the tension, the distant click of shoes echoing down the hall. Steady, slow, deliberate. The board turned as the door opened once more, and there stood Thomas Gray, uncuffed, flanked by another federal officer, his face calm, his stride steady. The officer announced, "We found no evidence of wrongdoing against Mr. Gray. He's free to continue his duties." The board gasped. Eleanor smiled faintly. Whitmore's face went pale. Thomas walked back to the head of the table, unhurried. He sat down, folding his hands exactly as he had before. And then, in a voice that carried across every corner of the room, he said, "Now, shall we talk about who's really been cleaning up after whom?" The boardroom was silent but electrified. Thomas sat at the head of the table, steady as stone, his calm presence now commanding the very respect that had once been denied him. Eleanor's eyes burned with approval. Half the board looked to him with relief, the other half with fear. And across from him sat Charles Whitmore, his empire collapsing in real time. His face was a mask of rage, desperation, and disbelief. But Whitmore wasn't finished. Not yet. He slammed his hand on the table, scattering the damning papers across the polished wood. "Do you fools really think this ends me? Do you think he ends me?" He pointed at Thomas, spitting the word like venom. "You've been tricked," he snarled. "This man isn't your savior. He's an opportunist, a fraud who clawed his way in by hiding behind pity and skin color. You're about to hand over your company to a janitor who knows nothing about real power." He reached into his jacket pocket. The room gasped. Chairs scraped. One of the board members shouted, "Security!" But Whitmore didn't pull out a weapon. Instead, he dropped a small black drive onto the table. Its presence seemed to hum with menace. "This," Whitmore said with a twisted grin, "is my insurance policy. Every dirty deal, every payout, every bribe, yours included. Do you really think the feds will only come for me? Open this file and you'll all go down." The board froze in terror. The balance wavered. For a moment, it seemed Whitmore might reclaim control, until Thomas leaned forward. Calm, steady. His voice carried like a hammer wrapped in silk. "Charles, your arrogance blinds you. You really think this drive protects you?" Whitmore sneered. "It protects me from you, janitor." Thomas shook his head slowly. "No, it destroys you. Because unlike you, I don't need to hide behind secrets. I came here with nothing but my name, and I'll leave with it intact. Can you say the same?" He nodded toward the federal agent by the door. The agent stepped forward, confiscated the drive, and tucked it into an evidence bag. The room erupted. Board members turned on Whitmore like wolves on a wounded animal. Voices shouted over each other. You lied to us. You used us. You nearly destroyed the company. Whitmore's composure cracked completely. He lunged across the table, shouting, You'll regret this, Gray. You'll regret ever thinking you belong at this table. But before he could reach him, 2 agents restrained him, dragging him toward the door. His screams echoed down the corridor until the sound faded into silence. Now only Thomas remained at the head of the table. Paper scattered before him, the board staring with a mixture of guilt, awe, and shame. He let the silence stretch, then spoke softly, but with unshakable authority. You laughed when you thought I was beneath you. You mocked the janitor, the black man who scrubbed your floors. But today, you learn the truth. Dignity doesn't wear a suit. Intelligence doesn't bow to prejudice. And justice doesn't stay buried forever. He paused, letting his words settle into their hearts like weighty stones. Never again mistake humility for weakness. Never again mistake skin for worth. No one dared speak. Eleanor broke the silence at last, her voice clear. All in favor of appointing Thomas Gray as interim chairman? One by one, hands rose around the table. Every single one. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling the gravity of it. Then he opened them and spoke the final words of the day. Then let's begin, not by chasing profit, but by restoring integrity. Because this company doesn't just need a leader. It needs a conscience. The gavel struck. The janitor had taken the seat at the head of the table, and justice had finally been served. Kindly subscribe for more stories like this, and don't forget to drop your comments.